So,
I mean, that's all it is. I didn't start the recording just so you wouldn't know that we were already recording. It's not recording yet. Right?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Now my mind's going blank. All right. Hello there. It's so weird.
World,
Yeah. Hello,
listening public.
world. Any listeners that might be out there? This is a kind of test recording, episode 0 of just a podcast. We don't know what it's called yet, but we'll figure that out as we go along. My name is Reed Chrisman. I am joined by my good friend of almost 10 years now, right?
It's true. It's true. Absolutely.
Yeah, my good friend Jonathan Goodison-Orr.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. As I've said to you before, Reed, I, other than occasionally listening to podcasts, I know nothing about podcasts. I have no insight. Frankly, I'm not entirely sure what we're doing here or what qualifies us to do this, but I'm very excited, and I am even more so thrilled to be able to go on this journey with yourself. So um, here we are, two people with really no podcasting or audio recording experience at all, really.
Nope, no experience, but
Embarking on this, and no qualifications.
yeah,
But
no experience, no qualifications, but you know what? We're bored and we like talking about movies and stuff. So
absolutely, absolutely. So we hope anyone who's out there listening, we hope if you're in the market for two random guys' opinions about movies and TV shows, because there aren't literally billions of those out there as is. We hope that you enjoy ours. We are very glad to be providing them because God knows we give them out for free as is anyway. So hopefully, some of you out there might find some benefit in our ramblings.
yes, this podcast is completely free. We stay afloat only by donations. And of course, once a year we do our annual fund drive. So if you could please donate. Every little bit helps. If it's $5, $10 a month, whatever you can contribute, so we can start our podcast.
Absolutely.
And we'll see you next year.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Yeah, but the whole reason we're doing this is, I mean, one, we've talked about it for a while, but two, we've now been in this pandemic for, a full year. Things have been shut down, and we just needed a new project to work on. But
absolutely.
It's kind of a shame that there's like so little. I mean, not that there's so little out there, but things have just been like very, very limited, I would say.
It's true. It's true. It's true. And so I think, as you just said, Reed, it's been now over a year of quarantine and quasi quarantine, and I think we were both looking for something to provide a little inspiration. So this was the project that we landed on, and here we are. So without further ado, unless there's anything else that you think we should say about ourselves, I guess we can just dive into kind of.
I think we should just dive into it.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
All righty. So today, you and I, we talk a lot about, not just movies, but the state of the movie business. We love breaking down kind of what's going on at the box office, and who's doing well, who's not doing well, what the new releases are. And so we thought that's kind of a natural place to start out for this kind of test recording, if you will. Just kind of chatting about where we are in 2021 with the state of the movie business, movie theaters, how the reopening is going, how it's looking like it's going to go, and what's coming down the pipeline to look forward to later on this year. Some movies that you and I are both personally quite interested in. So,
and some we're not.
And some perhaps less so. So just to kind of kick us off on the subject of movie theaters, last year in 2020, there was a lot of chatter, a lot of dialogue swirling around about, will this finally be the death of the movie theater? It was going out and out and out for years. Netflix and was bleeding it dry. All the streaming services are coming in now, and they were, it was going to be the end of the theatrical experience. You might still see a few theaters around that are the sole domain of big blockbusters, but other than that, the pandemic will just, knock them off for good. And while 2020 was undeniably a very tough year for theaters, in some places they were shut down for months at a time. And even in places where they weren't shut down, there were just no big releases to draw people in.
Yeah.
And so even though it was very tough, movie theaters stuck around. AMC, which was on the verge of bankruptcy for months last year, has pulled through and now is reopening. So, it's 2020 was not the death of the theatrical experiences, and as many people predicted. But I think that it's impossible to say, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Reed, but I think it's impossible to say that movie going will be exactly the same post-pandemic as it was pre-pandemic. I think that the fact of the matter is that in 2020, streaming services became not just more numerous, but I think they picked up a lot of power and a lot of clout that they didn't even have before. Netflix obviously was huge before the pandemic, but during and post, they're ubiquitous. I mean, you think of all the biggest movies that you saw last year, I guarantee you the majority of them were not in a theater, but they were on Netflix. Almost half of this year's Best Picture nominees were Netflix productions. And so I think that it's silly to think that when we all do go back to the theaters, it's going to be just like it was in early 2020, 2019, et cetera, et cetera. I think that it's going to be similar in some ways. You'll still see the increasing dominance of blockbusters and big movies and tentpole action films and superhero films and all that. But in other ways, it's going to be very different. And I think one of the primary ways that you're going to see that is the theatrical window. Now, this is the kind of thing that most normal people aren't really aware of. It's kind of an industry, kind of thing. But essentially what it is the studios and the theaters, even though they don't always get along and oftentimes rarely get along, they need each other. And so they need to have agreements about what the rules of the road are. So essentially the theaters say, all right, we're giving you this massive, the overwhelming majority cut, obviously, of the profits that the movie is making from ticket sales. But what you need to give us is at a several month window of time where the movies can only be seen in theaters. So your big MCU film, your big tentpole action film, whatever it is, we get exclusive rights to that movie for 4 months from release to, from release onwards, 5 months, whatever it may be, before it can even sniff on demand or streaming or anything like that. And I think what you're going to see is that's going to be a thing of the past. And I think that's one way where I think movie going is actually going to be better for the pandemic, because I think that it was really, I think it's really kind of an outdated business model where you see these movies have this 5 month theatrical window before they can even come close to, Blu-ray sales and on demand, and then streaming even later down the road. I think that now what you're going to start seeing is maybe they'll be shortened to 1 month windows, 2 month windows, in exchange for theaters keeping a greater percentage of the ticket of the box office. Because ultimately, even though the vaccines are picking up, things are getting a lot better now with the pandemic situation, and more people are going to the theaters. We just saw this past weekend with Godzilla vs. Kong pulling by far the biggest opening weekend since March of last year, almost $50 million, which is huge in post-pandemic numbers, just in its opening weekend.
Yeah.
A lot of people still aren't comfortable going back to the theater, and for many of those people, they won't be comfortable going back for some time. So, what do you do? Well, we saw this with what Warner Brothers and HBO Max did with their deal with the theaters. They said, we are going to put our entire 2021 slate, regardless of the pandemic situation, we're going to put our entire 2021 movie slate on HBO Max day and date with the theaters. And obviously, the theaters, in, by any conventional logic, the theaters would have gone apeshit over this. They would hate it because obviously that
They need
undercuts them
those
completely.
blockbuster sales. Yeah.
But that's the thing is that without that, what have they got? Because there's nothing else in theaters. Number one, and number two, Warner Brothers says, okay, well, we don't want to completely burn our bridges with the theaters. So here's what we're going to do: we're going to give the theaters a far more generous share of the box office than we were pre-pandemic, in exchange for them not fighting us on putting our slate day and date on HBO Max.
Mm.
Now
So they're kind of exchanging those that almost grace period. They're exchanging that for a higher cut.
Exactly. And they've said that this is just a 2021 thing. They're not going to be doing the day and date beyond this year. But I think that was really the first sign that the theatrical window that goes on for months and months and months, that's not coming back. Now all the big media companies, Warner Brothers has HBO Max, Disney has Disney Plus, Viacom now has Paramount Plus. All the big theatrical chains, or all the big studios, rather, pardon me, are now getting really heavily into direct-to-consumer video. And so they need all of their biggest films, all their best product to hit their streaming services as quickly as possible to bolster the value of those streaming services as quickly as possible. So I think what you're going to do is Warner Brothers did it first with their HBO Max deal, and now Disney has broken ranks because for the longest time they were very much on the side of theaters saying we're committed to the theaters, but that was before they ditched theaters for Mulan and Raya and the Last Dragon and now Black Widow. And so now Disney's broken ranks and they're saying that we're going to be putting a lot of our big movies on Disney Plus as well. And so I think that
it's interesting because, in Disney's current model, they are actually losing money, and they're projected to lose money for the next 5 years.
It's true, yeah.
But that just harkens back to what you said, which is that they're building up the reputation of their platform, building up the reputation of their streaming.
Absolutely, yeah. The reputation and the value as well, because the more of these big, because that's really what Disney, Walt Disney Studios is. It is big blockbusters nonstop. You're not getting a lot of nuanced indie fare from Walt Disney Studios, and that's okay. That's not what they're about. They do live action remakes, which make a ton of money, MCU films, and Star Wars. All three of those are, and Pixar, that all four of those are, and Disney animation, with their more, mainline animated films. All five of those,
as a quick tangent, is getting more and more similar to Pixar.
It's true, yeah.
I think there's going to come a point where they should consider, blending the two studios.
Absolutely,
they have the same style, but
yeah, and maybe they will do that. Although I think Pixar might be too fiercely independent. I don't know that they would go along with that. And also they're based in different places. Pixar is in the Bay Area and Disney Animation is at home base in Burbank. But I mean, if Disney really wanted to, I'm sure they could. But so Warner Brothers was the first to go. Then Disney broke ranks. And really Sony was one of the first to do it because they took Trolls World Tour was the first that ditched its theatrical release entirely and
that
to
made
go
headlines.
Straight to stream. It did, yeah.
No one thought that movie would do well, and then all of a sudden it was.
Yeah, and remember the theaters were furious about it too because they were saying that we will never. I don't think it was Sony. Pardon me. I think it was it Paramount that was Trolls World Tour. Let me look this up here. Because
an Illumination too. I'm not sure.
Let's see. Here we are. A Universal. There you go. It's Universal and DreamWorks. And the theaters were furious. They were saying literally, we will not exhibit future Universal Studios, DreamWorks pictures in our theaters again because we're so mad that you ditched, you took Trolls World Tour off the schedule and you put it straight on streaming. And so they were the first to do it, followed by Warner Brothers and now Disney. So theaters, they're smart enough to see the writing on the wall. They know that things aren't going to go back. The streaming services are now simply too important to these companies, and they're just not going to stand for the 5-month window anymore. So what they're going to do is they're going to say, all right, let's work this out. Let's do an HBO Max type deal where we will shrink the window to 2 months, even 1 month of exclusivity for a higher share of the box office, which will likely be lower anyway because of those people that just simply aren't ready yet to go back to theaters.
Yes.
And the studios will take that deal because at the end of the day, they don't, they still care about box office, but a lot of the people running the studios now, I mean, they tend to be, people more our age, millennials, young guns essentially, who are all in on streaming and see the box office more as kind of a legacy business than the future of their companies.
And this is where I get kind of mixed feelings because, I'm kind of the belief that, theaters are never gonna quite go away. And I don't think streaming is ever gonna completely replace them.
No.
If you remember, like Quibi was advertising everything and they're, starting all the new shows and their whole platform was, hey, we're kind of this streaming service and we have like these shortened episodes. And they completely disappeared as like 3 months after launch.
Failed completely, yeah.
Gone. They lost, millions, if not billions of dollars. And that was their whole goal was to be, up there with other streaming platforms.
Absolutely.
But the theater is more of an experience. With blockbusters, it's like something you go out and do with your friends, and then you get dinner afterwards. And I think honestly, what I see in the future is theaters actually getting bought out by some of the larger companies that are streaming, because the entire business model has changed. It used to be, like you said, there was that, grace period, and, theaters would buy the rights to certain movies, so then they could then sell tickets to those movies.
Yeah, play them for longer.
But, it's now, instead of buying the rights to the movies, it seems that companies are no longer selling. The producing studios are no longer selling those rights, and instead are, keeping the content on their own platforms. And I think that's why, the grace period is kind of disappearing.
Absolutely.
It's not about, how long can I show this for and how many people can I get to watch this thing I bought to show them. It's now, this is the content I have on my platform versus the content you have on your platform.
Exactly.
Which is, you have all those Netflix exclusives, you have all the Disney exclusives, and Disney was super smart because, they own so many, other companies and therefore have rights to tons of content, which they're no longer distributing to other platforms and therefore less likely to distribute to theaters.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of an interesting clash of these business models, and it's like, how do theaters really fit into that, because they're obviously not creating content, they're only showing. Whether there's like partnerships opened up between the theaters and the producing companies, whether theaters get bought out, I don't know what will happen. But at the same time, it's like, watching a movie on your computer at home is not the same as going out in a theater.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I think it's why I said at the beginning, I think it's going to be a change for the better, because ultimately, I think consumer choice is the winner is going to be the winner of this dichotomy, because just because these big movies can now be on Disney Plus or now be on HBO Max after only a month in theaters doesn't mean they automatically leave theaters at the end of that month. I mean, they'll still be in theaters. They just won't be exclusive anymore. And so, as you said, I mean, the theater is such. I mean, there's a reason why so many millions of people I mean, literally, you've seen it all over social media over the last week, where like almost crying. They were so happy to be back in a theater after over a year to see Godzilla versus Kong, because it's an incredible experience, and it's an experience that people really value and have really missed over a year of lockdown. And so the theatrical experience, I think, is something that you simply can't recreate it, unless you have a 60-foot screen at in your home someplace. There's no way to replicate that, and so it's not going anywhere, because it is as much an experience, and much more so an experience, than just a method of viewing entertainment product.
Yeah,
And
I
so,
would say like the best kind of example you can give of that, or the best metaphor, is like, listening to music on your phone versus going to see an in-person concert and hearing live
absolutely,
music. It's
absolutely,
like, you may think, oh, I have all this access to this music because I have a Spotify account,
right.
and I can enjoy it so much, and you kind of fail to remember what it's really like, and then you go see your concert for the first time in months. You see live music, and you're like, oh my God, this is so good. I
Absolutely,
think, and
100%.
that's what theaters are.
Absolutely, 100%, 100%. So that's why I think that's going to be a change for the better, because I think that the 4 or 5 months theatrical window, I think that was a dinosaur. I think that that's a good thing that it's going out, because ultimately, if we, the moviegoers, and we, the consumers, have more options, then I think that's great. The studios love it because it's just more content into the pipeline for their streaming services. And the theaters, I think, will like it too, because these big blockbusters, you say you have a Star Wars movie or a Marvel movie or a Fast and the Furious movie, those are still going to make north of $1 billion, easily, or the next James Bond film. Those are going to make easily north of $1 billion.
Yeah.
And if you can keep a greater, upfront percentage of that box office, you're going to at least break even on it. It's compared to what you would have been making in a 5-month exclusive window, because as we've seen, I mean, for so many of the blockbusters now, it's the huge burst of cash right at the beginning. Like it's a must-see event within the first 3 weeks.
And then it slows down.
85%, yeah, 85%
Yeah.
of the people that want to see it have seen it within the first 3 weeks, and then after that, you know, like if you've ever seen a big movie, more than a month after it's come out, it's like you're in a theater with maybe 3, 4 other people.
And that's the other thing, is that it's lost relevancy at that point. People aren't really talking
Exactly.
about it. They're talking about the next big thing. So
Exactly.
I think not only will theaters, you know, not have that kind of period of time where it's exclusive, but they'll just not even continue to show it for any period of time. It might be only a month,
Exactly.
because they can get as much money as possible. They can be the most efficient they can be, and for consumers, if you fail to see it in theaters, well, you already have it on one of your streaming platforms, most likely.
Exactly. Exactly. And so I think that's one thing that really will change for the best, because ultimately, yeah, I mean, so much of the money is made in those initial weeks anyway. If the theaters get a greater cut of that, then they will be, I think, more than breaking even, compared to what they would have been making, dragging it out for months on end. Because yeah, I mean, it's like either of us, if we think back to a time where we've been to see a movie more than a month, a month and a half after it's been out, and any of you out there who may be listening to this, usually it's almost like a private screening. It's like, even if it's not, I mean, forget like 3 o'clock on a Wednesday. Like, if you go 5 o'clock on a Saturday, but it's a movie that's been out for 6 weeks, you're mostly there by yourself.
Yeah.
So I I,
Which
I
is,
think
it is kind of a blessing. It's nice to see movies, have like the entire theater to yourself, but
yeah,
you also have to deal with that. You have to have an immense amount of patience, because again, you're waiting 5, 6, 7 weeks to see this movie.
exactly,
And a lot of
exactly,
times that's very frustrating.
absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, so I think that's really, I think, going to be the main thing to look at for the rest of this year. As the pandemic conditions improve, more and more people are going back to the theater. More big movies are going to start to come out. I think Godzilla versus Kong was really kind of the starting gun on that, and I think it's going to be very interesting, because there is just so much pent up demand to go back to the theaters. I think it's going to be when we really start to see it going over the summer and then later on into the fall, as we get into June, July, August, so on and so forth. I think it's going to be, not to be overly, rosy, but I think it's going to be like a renaissance of sorts for movie going, because there's so many movies that were delayed and pushed back from 2020 because of the pandemic, on top of the huge pent-up demand for movie going in the theater after a year of the pandemic, a year plus at that point. I think it's going to be really huge. So something to look forward to.
Yeah, I mean, I remember with Godzilla versus King Kong, like people have been talking that for months. Ever since the trailer was released, people were going crazy. There were all these debates as to who's going to win, and memes started generating and all that. It's like, you can just kind of feel the internet vibrating with excitement for going 100%. Back to theaters.
100%. 100%.
And there's a lot of great stuff coming out that I think people are getting really excited about.
Absolutely.
Godzilla vs. Kong was just the first one.
Absolutely. So that's actually a great segue into, I think, the next thing we wanted to get to, which is a little while ago, you and I made a list of some movies that are coming out later this year that we're very excited about or just want to comment on. Yeah. And so what do you say we dive into that and just kind of see where that conversation takes us? So let us begin. And starting with one that I think is very relevant to what we were just talking about, Black Widow. So this is the first MCU movie that's going to be coming out post-pandemic. Originally scheduled for May of 2020, got pushed back to November of 2020, then to May of this year, and now just recently pushed back once again July of this year.
Yeah.
And I have some things I want to say about Black Widow because we were just singing the praises of how some of these developments make sense for a lot of these companies and how it's a savvy business move. I don't know what Disney is doing here, so maybe you can help me understand what their decision making was, because I've been trying to figure out why they've done this and I can't sort it out. So
I don't know either. I mean, it's weird because my understanding was that they had Black Widow sitting and ready to go for a while.
Yes.
As far as I know, there weren't any like reshoots or delays in editing.
No.
So it's just been ready to go, and I guess they're hoping for that summer blockbuster release. But it's weird because as exciting as it is to go back to theaters, it's like I've been watching WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier on Disney Plus, and I'm probably planning on watching Black Widow on Disney Plus instead of in theaters. Yeah. So I'm curious to see how the demographics kind of play out on that. What percentage actually view it in theaters versus at home. But it feels really strange. And it's possible that just, because everyone's been at home all this time, that kind of natural, cycle of releases where you have like the Christmas release and then, something in the middle of the spring and then the summer blockbusters, and that rhythm has kind of fallen apart.
Yeah.
They may be trying to revive that a little bit, but I have no idea.
Yeah. For me, it's three things. I mean, pretty much just to echo what you said. So the first thing is pandemic conditions. As we just saw with Godzilla versus Kong, the vaccines are picking up. People are more comfortable than ever since the pandemic began to go back to the theater. So this movie was slated for the first weekend of May. We're at the very beginning of April now. So this would be a further month moving ahead. We know that it's not only have the theaters been advertising the extensive precautions that they're taking to keep the theater experience safe. Masks will, I'm sure, still be required by next month. But also people are more comfortable than ever with going back. And a Marvel movie, certainly, I mean, talk about great press for Marvel Studios and Disney, because Godzilla vs. Kong did really well, but an MCU movie coming out the first weekend of May, in that traditional Avengers slot, I mean, they would have been the ones that would have been truly heralded as the beginning of the big summer of return to movie going. And so that's the first thing I don't understand, is that Disney sees the same thing all the rest of us are seeing. Things are getting better, and things are going to be in a very good spot, as good as they've ever been by May. So why push it back? That's the first thing. The second thing is the Disney Plus angle of it. What Disney and other studios, but really mainly Disney, was the one that's making the most noise about this over the past year, is they always thumped their chest and said, we are committed to the theatrical experience. We are sticking with theaters. We intend our biggest movies to be seen on the biggest screen. We want theatrical releases. And the MCU was always the vanguard of that. Because Star Wars right now is kind of, on ice. We had Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah,
so,
Star Wars used to be like every December. They're having like a movie every Christmas. But the MCU got to a point where they were doing like pumping out 3-4 movies a year.
Exactly.
So they were doing the full cycle.
Exactly. So with Star Wars kind of on ice, the MCU is the undisputed end all and be all of, big Disney releases. And so they were saying, it's got to be in theaters. It's got to be in theaters. We're going to make over $1 billion easily, $1.3, $1.4 billion on Black Widow. It's got to be in theaters. We got to get those box office receipts. And yet, with things looking as good as they've ever been, they put it on Disney Plus on top of pushing it back to July. So, and this is the fundamental contradiction. My understanding is it was always either or. You could either keep it where it is and also put it on Disney Plus, or you could push it back to keep it exclusively in theaters. It doesn't make any sense to push it back and also offer it on Disney Plus, because the fact of the matter is the people who really want to see Black Widow in theaters will see it in theaters. I mean, theaters now reopening in New York. They're reopening in LA. They've been open in many parts of the country for months now. If you want to see it in theaters, you will have the opportunity to see it in theaters. And so those people will go, and you'll make a lot of money at the box office off of those people. And for those people that aren't comfortable with the idea of going back yet, they can watch it on Disney Plus. So keep it in May, make your money at the box office, and then for those people that want to watch on Disney Plus, have it on Disney Plus. Or if you're saying we're still not confident enough about where things will be in May, we want to push it to July, fine, push it to July, but then why also put it on Disney Plus? If you're delaying it so that conditions can improve, why also hedge and say, well, we think things will be good enough by July, but not really, because it's also going to be on Disney Plus. Now, the explanation that I think this is probably what you're about to say is, well, just to put one more high-profile thing on Disney Plus, right? But of course, it's an MCU movie. It doesn't really need that. So that's kind of my thinking on that, is why delay it and also put it on the streaming service, especially when you consider my third thing, which is, and you mentioned this as well, now we have the MCU Disney Plus shows. We had WandaVision, in late winter. Now we've got Falcon and the Winter Soldier. We've got Loki now that's supposed to come out after Black Widow. Now it's coming out before in June. Now that the MCU Phase 4 train is rolling, as we've seen, once it's going, it's impossible to stop. I mean, as you said, we're getting 4 movies a year, 6 or 7 Disney Plus shows a year. Everything's interconnected, so you can't just move things around willy-nilly because everything has a knock-on effect. Like, for instance, even Black Widow is supposed to lead into things that were, characters and events that we're going to see in the Hawkeye series in the fall. And so once that train is going, you've got to have your plan and stick with it. So since Black Widow is mostly a prequel to the events of Infinity War and Endgame, I suppose it wasn't the most devastating thing to have to push back a little bit. But things are going now. Phase 4 has begun. So that's the other thing you have to consider is you push back Black Widow, and that has a knock-on effect, not just for the other movies, but for all the Disney Plus series as well. So So I think that's another reason why I just can't quite understand it. Why push it back and put it on Disney Plus? I don't get it, but I don't know. Maybe you've thought about it in a way that I haven't.
I mean, the way I see it, it's, I mean, one, they could have done almost the opposite of the typical theatrical model, where they could have had it released on Disney Plus in May and then release in theaters in July.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they pushed both back because on Disney Plus it is going to be one of those premiere access things. So you do have to pay an additional fee, which, you know, I'm not a fan of that model in general, because, you know, you're already paying a monthly fee just for the streaming service. You're basically paying a monthly fee for the liberty of paying to see a movie.
Right.
So at that point, I think that's where you're coming from. Is like, you know, if you have to do all that, why not just go see it in theaters? But, you know, the whole Disney Plus service, you know, part of what it's doing, one of its angles is, you know, kind of making an archive of the entire MCU.
Yeah.
So any future content that they create has to go on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
I think that's, you know, that's kind of the future of the entire business, is that all of their content is going to go on this platform for as long as this platform exists.
Yeah.
The other thing, I think, I don't know if this was done intentionally, but I think an added benefit of them pushing it back to July does have to do with that kind of buildup of momentum. Because I remember, you know, after Avengers Endgame, people were like, whoa, this is amazing. It feels, you know, this is an incredible 10-year legacy.
Absolutely.
I'm kind of burnt out. I don't want to watch any Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, you know, Spider-Man Far From Home, which came out shortly after, that did really well. But
yeah,
you know, there was always this chatter about like, oh, what is the MCU going to do now? It's not going to be the same. It's not going to do as well. I think that would have contributed to lower box office scores with the Black Widow movie if it weren't for these new shows that are kind of rebuilding that momentum.
Oh, absolutely.
And giving people content to enjoy that gets them reinvested in the universe, so then they can go see Black Widow either in theaters or, you know, paying a premium on the platform.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's true. You know, it's the Disney Plus shows, the MCU Disney Plus shows have massively kind of ramped up that now anticipation and momentum for what's next for Marvel, which only adds to what I was saying, which is, you know, WandaVision did great. Falcon the Winter Soldier, which is airing now, is doing really well. You know, everybody's excited again. So why push it back even further if it's going to be on Disney Plus with everything else to begin with? You know, it continues to perplex me. I mean, if anything, you want to capitalize on that momentum, because you have Loki coming out in mid-June, and I don't know if you've seen the new trailer for the Loki show,
I have,
or even yeah, you've seen the new one. I'm assuming the original trailer as well. Have you seen that? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that show is looking really fantastic. Like, that is going to be the summer event series. I'm convinced. I mean, it's got so much of the Rick and Morty DNA, which obviously is huge in its own right. The showrunner is one of the Rick and Morty writers. A lot of the writing team is carried over from the Rick and Morty team. And obviously, you've got a megastar, you know, Loki, Tom Hiddleston. That's going to be a massive event series. So Loki doesn't need any help in terms of being or doesn't need any help, or doesn't need to be kind of a lead in to a movie, especially not Black Widow, because the two things have no relation to one another.
Yeah.
And so it just doesn't make any sense. What I think you're going to see happen in the beginning of July, we'll already have had a few weeks of Loki. I think Black Widow might actually be a situation where it's almost overshadowed by the Disney Plus show that's airing at the same time that that's coming out, because Loki is looking really fantastic. And, you know, you combine Rick and Morty, super popular, the MCU, uber popular, and it just doesn't make a ton of sense to me. I think that if you have Black Widow that comes around the end of Falcon and Winter Soldier, kind of, and the stopgap before Loki, that kind of makes sense because the Falcon and the Winter Soldier and Black Widow, they kind of exist in that
They're more
same
similar
space.
genres, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Kind of more, earth based, kind of, more earth based, just a little more grounded, so to speak. And so it just doesn't make a ton of sense, have it on Disney Plus if you want to put it on Disney Plus. Have that kind of be coming out as Falcon Winter Soldier wraps up, and then in June, Loki will do great, and then keep Shang-Chi where it was originally, which was in that July 9th spot, because that I think that's a character that we haven't seen before. It's going to be something completely new, and we'll talk more about Shang-Chi in a bit, but I think the way they had it laid out made a lot of sense. Have Black Widow kind of come out around the end of Falcon Winter Soldier. Then you'll have Loki and Shang-Chi, which are completely different things, kind of more so in the WandaVision mold. And kind of have that really be your headliner of the summer, because those are forward-looking things. And this is really what I'm getting at, to arrive at my point in a very roundabout way. Those are both very forward-looking future of the MCU titles. Black Widow quite literally is about the past.
Yeah.
We know that character dies in Avengers Endgame. Spoilers for all 11 people in the world that haven't
If you
seen
haven't
Avengers
seen
Endgame.
it, that's your fault.
Yeah, no, it's I don't know that that's physically possible at this point. But we see that character die in Avengers Endgame. We know her story is concluded. Black Widow is just supposed to fill in the gaps of what happened leading up to that point. To kind of give that character a fuller backstory before we say goodbye. And so it just doesn't seem like, this is the thing that we're going to really hang our hat on to, for the summer, after, you've had WandaVision, which was completely different and was great, and Loki, which is completely different and I'm sure is going to be great, and Falcon and Winter Soldier, which is we're familiar, but also just, it keeps that momentum up. So yeah, I don't get it. Frankly, I'm a little bit annoyed by it because I was really looking forward to that being the movie that I would go back to theaters to see, but it is what it is, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, going back to your, why didn't they put Shang-Chi as that July release? It's possible that they just couldn't and they had to push it back, because of filming limitations.
It's true.
We are still in this kind of COVID era, and like a lot of movies that were, planned to be made still, can't be made, or the entire production process is just extremely slow.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll say this.
Probably my best guess, and then they just decided to push back Black Widow into that spot, so there wasn't as big of a gap. But it's kind of a mystery.
Yeah, and I'll say this as well. I know that, as you said, Black Widow was, ready to go. Like post-production finished, editing finished. That one was ready. Shang-Chi has finished filming. I know that. They finished filming late last year.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
And so I think they're in post-production now. Eternals was finished filming a while ago. Because that was really supposed to be November 2020. It was supposed to be the second film to come out, not the third. So I think that one is also it's finishing post-production now. And then beyond that, Spider-Man they just finished filming, but that's not coming out until December of this year. So they still have a while of post-production.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, I think Thor: Love and Thunder Doctor Strange first. Doctor Strange 2, yes. Multiverse of Madness. I think they're filming that now. Thor: Love and Thunder, I think they're about to start filming. And beyond that, Captain Marvel 2 is pre-production. What else? And what is the next film after that? I forget.
I have no.
Guardians of the Galaxy 3. That one is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, to talk about movies that have been pushed back. I mean, that was.
Oh my God! Yeah. Well, that was before.
They were planning on doing that even before Endgame.
They were the plan was to start filming that in fall of 2018, but that was when the whole James Gunn firing was happening, that whole situation. And
Yeah,
so,
which that was kind of an unfortunate situation. I don't know how you feel about, the idea of, you know, he had some like racist tweets and but obviously that was also, from a long time ago and he had
yeah.
become a different person.
Yeah, no, my understanding of it was, he had, years ago, like a decade plus ago, he had made some, some distasteful jokes and some off-color jokes about, subjects that are obviously not very Disney friendly.
Yes.
Um, and so, originally it was some right wing website that had kind of seized upon these tweets because James Gunn is a pretty outspoken for his, liberal viewpoints politically. And so this right wing website had kind of gone through his Twitter, and was essentially looking for dirt. They dug up these old tweets and put them out there. It became a big story. Obviously, Disney got wind of it, and they're so reflexively protective of their family friendly image that they just reflexively said nope, cannot be associated with this. James Gunn has got to go. But justifiably, everybody was kind of saying, well, this is BS. I mean, it's not like let's not forget, it's not like Disney has not worked with
Yeah, they
some.
don't have the best
Yeah,
track record
yeah,
either.
yeah. They're not saints with the people that they've worked with in the past. I
If you
mean,
watch some of those old animations, like it's distasteful to
yeah.
say the least.
Oh, absolutely, and also just even specifically the people they hire. I mean, let's not forget that um what was it called? Harvey Weinstein, before he had the Weinstein Company, there was a different film production studio, a very big one. I forget what it's called. Miramax, yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, or something like that. Um, produced a lot of big dramas in the '90s and 2000s. It was kind of like, Disney's, that was where they would go when they wanted to produce like, serious Oscar contender type films,
Yeah.
not like their usual kind of thing. Um, and obviously, obviously, we all know what kind of person Harvey Weinstein was. So it's not like Disney is saintly when it comes to the people that they hire. And obviously, some of the people that they've worked with in the past have done some reprehensible things, not just tweeted some terrible things. So so they fired him, but everybody pointed out the blatant hypocrisy. And then they hired him back months later, but by that point, Gunn had already signed on to do the Suicide Squad, so he was
Yeah.
tied up for the next several years. So that's what really pushed it back to like 2023, because at that point, he was just tied up doing other stuff. So yeah, it's terrible what happened with Guardians 3, because that was supposed to be, this was never confirmed, but the wide speculation was the real launch of Phase 4 wasn't supposed to be Black Widow. It was supposed to be Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3.
Mm.
But because you had that massive production issue with the director, um, it's now, coming down 2 years from now. So
I'm sure it's gonna be a completely different movie than what it was planned to be.
oh, without a doubt, without a
If it was
doubt.
originally gonna kick off. And I believe last I heard, they wanted to bring on Taika Waititi to do Guardians 3.
Mm,
I don't
yeah.
know if that's still the case. But obviously he did Thor Ragnarok and he's coming back for Thor Love and Thunder. So those are really exciting.
Yeah.
But Suicide Squad is coming out this next year. So I'm excited to see kind of what that's like and it's great that he's kind of continuing his career.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, yes. So
We do have a full list of we do have a full list of um, different movies coming out this year that we were planning on talking about, but
We may
you
have to
know,
save that for our
yeah, we
next.
might have to save that for another episode. Um, yeah, but
But
it's kind of interesting just overall how cancel culture is influencing the industry and how the entire industry is kind of becoming this internet based service and so
absolutely,
much is changing. Things used to be so, or at least felt so simple, you know even a year ago before all of this pandemic stuff, where it's like, there's this great movie, you go see it in theaters, and then if you miss it in theaters, you know wait a few months until you used to be able to get DVDs, and then it was on demand, and it's I don't know. Do you think things have changed for the better, or do you think they've gotten too complicated?
I think I think the streaming revolution, if you will. I think there is a lot that it does improve, and it will be improving. I think one of the things that we discussed earlier was the theatrical window. I think it's good that ultimately customers will have more choices in where they want to watch, what they want to watch. And I think that also it's good in the sense that, because there's now such an arms race for content between all the studios, Universal, Disney, Warner Brothers, Sony, everybody is so hungry for content that you're going to see a lot more money being thrown around in Hollywood towards artists and really talented people who may not have been able to, get their stuff funded through the more traditional old school studio system that will now get a shot
Yeah,
because just there's such a massive amount of desire for new content, which is great because that's just ultimately more stuff for us. That's more potential for that next breakout series, that next breakout director, that next breakout writer, which is really fantastic, and just more great new weird stuff. Like I think of like a show like Lovecraft Country. Did you see that on HBO last year?
I
Um,
haven't actually.
Oh, it's a great series. It's kind of like a sci-fi horror series on HBO and HBO Max, and that's the kind of thing where it's really weird. It's a weird. It's weird. It's got a really cool premise, but it's got a lot of stuff that it's like it's kind of hard to explain. You just kind of have to watch it, and it's super well done. It's super well executed. But that's the kind of thing where I couldn't imagine HBO doing something like that 10 years ago. But
Yeah,
because they have HBO Max and they want all eyeballs, every eyeball they can get on HBO Max, they produced it. They put a lot of money behind it, and the result was fantastic. Um, and so on and so forth. I mean, there are lots of examples I think that we've seen that we're going to continue to see where, there are a lot of really talented people that might not necessarily get $100 million to make a blockbuster movie, but they can get $50 million to make a really cool streaming series or streaming film. And that's, I think, going to be great. So that's another good thing about it. But
yeah. It's kind of a mixed bag though. At least in the way I see it, because it's fantastic for younger, less experienced, more independent filmmakers and producers and whatnot. And it's an opportunity for them to create the content they want, because obviously they're getting paid by these companies to create
yeah,
content for the streaming platform. But my concern is, what happens when you're creating content that you really enjoy, but then it's not getting watched because it just disappears under the giant pile of content.
right. And I think that that's kind of the Netflix phenomenon as well, because obviously Netflix has given us some incredible movies, original movies, and original series, but there's just so much stuff on Netflix. Like, as the common joke is that, Netflix, they'll greenlight almost anything. Like they just
Yeah.
want more stuff essentially, and they don't care how much money they have to spend. I mean, for so much of their existence, they were running huge deficits, but they didn't care because ultimately, for every 100 projects they funded, one or two will become a mega breakout hit. Um, and so I think it's a fair point that there's a lot of stuff that goes under the radar, but ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're an artist who is really talented, who maybe who's gotten some opportunities but could be doing a lot more, I think if you make something really cool and you get to make money yourself and employ a lot of other talented people to help you make it, even if it's not a huge hit, I think that will be rewarding in and of itself. And most importantly, you could then use that as a launching point to say, well,
Yeah.
I directed this, I wrote this. And so now, even if that doesn't get, a season 2 or a sequel or whatever it may be, you could then use that to then jump onto a different project, maybe an even bigger endeavor.
Yeah,
So,
it's a huge career booster, to say the least.
Exactly. So I think it's good for people working in entertainment because there's going to be a lot of money being thrown around and a lot of people that are working as a result of that. And I think that we're going to get, because a lot of the stuff, it will go under the radar. It won't make a huge splash, but we will get, some real gems out of that kind of gold rush, if you will. And I think that's ultimately where we win as viewers of the content. And so I think those are two really positive things about it. But I will say this, on the flip side, what worries me about the streaming age is, for the longest time, it was Netflix, just period, end of story, maybe Hulu, Now you have Netflix, you have Hulu, you have Disney Plus, HBO Max, Paramount Plus, Showtime, anything and everything else. There are 17 different streaming services, and we know that just at the end of the day, when you look at what people pay for, and they've done studies on this, the average person will pay for one, maybe two streaming services for the monthly fee. If they're really like avid like movie and TV watchers, they might stretch out to three. But so few people are paying for 4 or more streaming services a month. I mean, that's just a lot. That's Netflix is $10, Hulu is 10, 15 more bucks, HBO Max is $15, Disney Plus is $7, $8. I mean, that's a lot for all these individual streaming services. And so ultimately, it's also an arms race in the sense that those that cannot really, prove to people up front right now, we have the must-see stuff. Because Netflix will automatically be, if you only have 2 streaming services, Netflix will automatically be one of them. So it's that competition for that second slot. What's that second streaming service going to be? And ultimately, if you don't have a Mandalorian, if you don't have a big must-see show like that, then you're going to get blown out.
Yeah.
That's why I think we saw HBO Max really struggling at first because they have the whole backlog of HBO content, which is great content, but it's not new stuff. And what does Warner Brothers have? I mean, they have huge franchises like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings. Like, instead of in the beginning, they focused on a lot of original stuff, which is admirable because some of it was quite good. Like, I never watched the Raised by Wolves series, but apparently people kind of liked that one. And other HBO stuff that was kind of HBO Max kind of joint productions. But if you're not leveraging your, like a franchise like Harry Potter, whereas Disney's going all in on MCU and Star Wars and Pixar, then you're going to lose that race every time. I'm sorry to say, like that's why. That's why you've only just now said that. Oh well, now we're going to be doing an HBO Max. I think they're doing an HBO Max Harry Potter movie now. So. Because ultimately that's what brings people in is the stuff new stuff, but stuff that's in the world of stuff that they already know and like. And so I think that's where you're going to start seeing some attrition because ultimately everyone's trying streaming right now, but not everyone can succeed in streaming. There's only enough money that people are going to be willing to spend per month for streaming services. So I think that I think you're going to start to see a lot of content that is good, but not quite good enough to justify getting an extra subscription. And then if those fail, then you know, that's kind of the end of the road for whatever was on that service. So
Yeah.
I think it's not even so much a bad thing, but just a warning, because ultimately, right now everybody wants a streaming service, but not everyone can sustain one. Disney has kind of been the strongest out of the gate. HBO Max is picking up now. Even Amazon Prime is very strong. And Hulu is still pretty strong. So I think it's going to be a hell of a competition, and so just an area to watch, to be sure.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot to think about, and I wish we had more time. I think this is definitely something we'll pick up in the next episode, because
Absolutely.
the state of the industry now is just so fascinating. But for now, I think we have to end this recording here.
It's
Thank you
true.
so
It's
much for
true.
listening. I've been Reed Chrisman, joined
And
by
I've been yes, and I've been Jonathan Goodison-Orr. Thank you very much for listening.
we have no idea what this is called yet, but we'll figure it out as we go.
Absolutely. Well, Reed, a pleasure as always.
Yes, sir.